point where nothing changes, but everything looks different. People are still talking, still chasing, still repeating the same patterns, but now you see it not individually, but as a system, predictable, cyclical, almost scripted. And the unsettling part is this: you can see exactly what comes next, not because you're smarter, but because you stepped just far enough back to notice the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you realize something you can't ignore. Most people aren't choosing their lives, they're following them. When the world you once understood begins to feel distant, nothing outwardly collapses, the structures remain intact, people continue as they always have, the routines, the conversations, the ambitions, all still moving forward with mechanical certainty. But something inside you withdraws. You begin to see things you didn't notice before, not because they were hidden, but because you were once part of them. And now you are not. It is not rebellion, it is not even a conscious decision. It is a separation, and with it comes an unfamiliar kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of no longer recognizing the game everyone else is still playing. You start to realize that belonging was never just about connection, it was about agreement. Modern culture does not understand this moment. It interprets disconnection as dysfunction. If you no longer fit, the assumption is that something has gone wrong. You are told to reintegrate, to find your place again, to restore alignment with the system that once gave your life structure. Because in a world that prioritizes productivity, clarity, and visible success, there is little tolerance for those who step outside the rhythm. The system, whether social, professional, or cultural, rewards continuity. It rewards those who can sustain identity within predefined roles, be consistent, be reliable, be understandable. But inner development does not follow this logic. It is not linear, it is not efficient, and often it requires a kind of psychological distance from what once felt normal. What looks like disconnection from the outside may, in fact, be the beginning of deeper perception. Carl Jung described a process he called individuation, the gradual unfolding of the self beyond collective expectations. He believed that, at some point, a person must confront the limits of socially constructed identity. The roles, the labels, the narratives, they serve a purpose, but they are not the totality of who you are. And when you begin to outgrow them, something shifts. Not externally at first, but internally your perception changes. You begin to see the system not as reality, but as a structure that once held you and now no longer fits. Let's understand what begins to emerge in this state, not as a breakdown, but as a sequence of psychological revelations, a progression of seeing. First shift, you begin to see the performance. When you are inside the system, behavior feels natural, conversations feel spontaneous, roles feel authentic. But once you step outside, even slightly, you begin to notice something subtle. How much of life is performed, not in a deceptive sense, but in a habitual one. People speak in rehearsed tones. They express opinions that align with their environment. They pursue goals that are widely validated, even if privately unexamined. This is not dishonesty, it is adaptation. As Jung observed, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and so most people don't. They construct identities that function well enough within the system, identities that are rewarded, recognized, and rarely questioned. But now, from your new vantage point, you begin to see the gaps, the slight hesitations, the forced enthusiasm, the subtle dissonance between what is said and what is felt, and perhaps most unsettling of all, you begin to recognize how much of your own past behavior followed the same pattern. Imagine sitting in a crowded room. Laughter moves across the space in waves. Conversations overlap, everyone appears engaged, animated, present, but you are quiet, not withdrawn, but observant, and for the first time you notice how predictable it all is. The same topics, the same reactions, the same social rhythms repeating themselves. It is not wrong, but it no longer feels real in the way it once did. You begin to see the cost of belonging. Belonging, in its simplest form, is comforting. To be understood, accepted, included. It provides stability. It reduces friction. It offers a sense of identity that is reinforced by others. But now, at a distance, you begin to see what was exchanged for that comfort. Conformity, not always explicit, not always forced, but present. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." And yet, most people unknowingly pay the opposite price. They exchange parts of themselves for acceptance, small compromises at first, adjustments in language, in behavior, in ambition. Over time, these adjustments accumulate into a life that is coherent, but not entirely their own. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You begin to understand why so many people feel restless despite having everything they were told to want. Because belonging, when it requires self abandonment, carries a quiet cost. Third shift, you begin to see meaning differently. When you are fully embedded in the system, meaning is often defined externally: achievement, progress, recognition. You move forward because forward is the direction everyone agrees upon. But once you step outside, this orientation dissolves. You are no longer pulled by the same incentives. The same markers of success feel distant, and this creates a temporary void. Viktor Frankl described this as the existential vacuum, a state in which old sources of meaning lose their power but new ones have not yet fully formed. It is an uncomfortable space, because without external validation, you are left with a more difficult question. What is meaningful to me when no one is watching? This is where inner development begins to replace external direction. Slowly, meaning becomes less about achievement and more about alignment, less about recognition and more about authenticity. Picture a man walking alone at night. The city around him is alive, lights, movement, noise, but he is moving at a different pace. There is no destination, no urgency. For the first time in years, he is not moving towards something predefined. He is simply walking. And in that stillness, something unfamiliar begins to emerge. Not clarity, not certainty, but a quiet sense of presence. Fourth shift, you begin to see yourself without the system. This is perhaps the most difficult and most important realization, because once you no longer belong to the system in the same way, you are left without its mirror. No clear role, no predefined identity, no immediate validation. And so, you are confronted with yourself, not the version that was shaped by expectation, but the one that exists beneath it. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes essential. All the parts of you that were suppressed to maintain belonging, your contradictions, your impulses, your unexpressed desires, they begin to surface. Not all of them are comfortable. Some challenge the identity you've maintained. Others reveal paths you were too cautious to take. But this is not regression, it is integration. To become whole, you must reclaim what was left behind, and this process does not feel like improvement, it feels like disruption. There is a temptation at this stage to return, to re enter the system fully, to restore the previous identity, to silence the questions that have begun to emerge. Because uncertainty is difficult, and belonging, even if incomplete, is familiar. But something has changed. You have seen too much, and once perception expands, it does not contract. Now imagine an older man sitting by a hospital window. The room is quiet, machines hum softly in the background. Outside, the world continues, unaware, uninterrupted. He is not thinking about success, not about recognition, not about how well he fit into the system. He is thinking about moments, the ones he lived fully and the ones he did not, the conversations he avoided, the risks he postponed, the parts of himself he never allowed to emerge. And in that space, a different kind of clarity appears. not about what the world expected of him, but about what he never gave himself permission to become. This is the existential edge of the journey, because eventually, the question is not whether you belonged, it is whether you became whole. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but this privilege comes with a cost, the cost of stepping outside what is known, the cost of disappointing expectations, the cost of facing yourself without distraction. And yet, there is something on the other side of this cost. Not certainty, not comfort, but depth, a life that may not always be understood, but is internally coherent, a life that does not rely entirely on external validation, because it is anchored in something more stable, something real. To no longer belong to the system is not to reject it entirely, it is to see it clearly, to participate when necessary, but not to lose yourself within it, to recognize that identity is not something given, but something discovered, often in solitude, and perhaps that is what you begin to see most clearly of all, that the distance you feel is not a failure of connection, it is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself, quieter, less certain, but more honest. If this perspective resonates with something you've been sensing but couldn't quite name, consider staying with these reflections. There is more to uncover beneath the surface, and sometimes the most important insights arrive not loudly, but slowly over time.